And welcome to Backspace Academy, and welcome to the AWS Certified Associate course. If you've just joined us, you've just made the very first step in an exciting and rewarding career in Amazon Web Services. So we're going to start off with having a look at this massive AWS global infrastructure, and then we'll discuss what actually is cloud computing and what are the cloud computing models that are available for us to use. And then we'll go on to discussing serverless computing, be able to deploy compute capacity without having to worry about having servers in the background doing that for us. Then we'll look at the different options that are available for deploying on the cloud, and we'll look at the AWS service categories. And there's a lot of them, and there is a lot of AWS services. And then finally, we'll finish up by having a little bit of a hands-on use of the AWS Management Console. The AWS global infrastructure is massive. It consists of 16 regions located across the globe, 42 availability zones, and well over 50 edge locations. Now, your choice of region can depend on a number of things. For example, you may want to give your end user the best user experience by having the most optimized latency. For example, if you're located in Brazil, then you would probably want to use the São Paulo region, because that's going to give your end users the best or most optimized latency to access your infrastructure. But that said, there may be other reasons why you want to use a different region other than the region that you are located in. For example, I'm located in Australia, in the Sydney region, but I mostly use the US East 1 or US East Standard region. The reason for that is that that region has significantly lower cost for me than the Sydney region. So not all regions cost the same amount. They do vary according to region. Another reason for me to use the US East Standard region is that I know that that region fully supports the broad offering of AWS. Whereas if I'm looking at something like the Mumbai region, which is a brand new region, that doesn't support all of the AWS services. So a lot of times you can get stuck if you're developing a solution and then you get to implement that solution, you find out, oh, hang on, my Mumbai solution actually won't work because we don't have that service available within Mumbai. So you need to take that into consideration, and that's why throughout this course we use the US East Standard region predominantly. You may also want to locate your servers in a specific region based on regulatory or legal requirements. There may be a requirement that you have to have your servers located in your country, and for that perspective you may want to consider locating them within your country, or there may be the opposite, that may be a regulatory requirement that requires that you have to locate your servers outside of your country. So the choice of region is quite important, and there are a number of factors around that. All regions are divided up into availability zones. Some have more availability zones than others. For example, the US East regions have 3. And when we look at Mumbai, for example, that only has 2 availability zones. It's a smaller region and a newer region. So those availability zones within a region, they are insulated from failures in other availability zones. So what that does, it enables you to have very good high availability. It's good for disaster recovery, because if one of those availability zones goes down, if you have your infrastructure shared across those availability zones, the infrastructure that is located in the other availability zone will continue to operate. So it gives you good redundancy and reliability for your infrastructure. And a lot of services out of the box support multi-availability deployment. For example, the relational database service does that very well. We also have 50 or well over 50 edge locations, and they are for the CloudFront service. Now, what CloudFront is, it's a caching service for Amazon Web Services, and it gets your content, your regularly used content, in a CloudFront distribution, and it locates it specifically at these edge locations. So what that means is that you are going to get really high performance delivery of your content through to your end user. It's also going to save you server costs because that content that is regularly accessed and doesn't change that much will be delivered immediately to your end user and won't even go anywhere near your servers unless that changes. So the CloudFront caching of data is a very important, very useful feature of AWS as well. Now, before we get too far ahead and start discussing all about Amazon Web Services, I think we need to ask the question, what is cloud computing? What is this whole cloud thing all about? And if you ask that question to a number of people, they generally get stumped if they haven't thought about that answer. And they'll generally come back and say, well, the cloud, it's internet. The cloud is the internet. It's that interweb thingy, which is not necessarily correct. Well, it's actually not correct. So I think one of the best definitions for cloud computing comes from Wikipedia. And that simply says that cloud computing, it provides shared computing processing resources and data to computers and other devices on demand. So Amazon Web Services has a massive amount of computer processing resources located across the globe, and databases and data storage, and that is available to computers and other devices on demand when needed. And it is shared across all of those literally millions of users. And by doing that, the costs involved in using these IT resources is significantly reduced because it's shared across millions of people. AWS also has its own definition of cloud computing, which is similar but slightly different. Cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of compute power, database storage, applications, and other IT resources through a cloud services platform via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. So it's pretty well the same definition, but it mentions that it goes through a cloud services platform with pay-as-you-go pricing. And that is very good if you're talking about AWS or Azure or any one of these commercial cloud offerings, but it doesn't really explain a private cloud. So you can actually create your own private cloud using your own pool of resources, and you don't need to actually use a AWS or any other service provider to do that. So that's really what cloud computing is all about, and it's not just the internet. Cloud computing is where we pull together computing resources and share those resources on an on-demand basis to multiple users. There are a number of models available for cloud computing, and they vary from very low level and nuts and bolts models right through to very high level and abstract models. Now, the first one there, the low level nuts and bolts model, is the infrastructure as a service, and that contains the basic building blocks for cloud IT. So we're going to grab these basic building blocks and we're going to piece them all together and link them all up, and we're going to create a solution. And a good example of that is the AWS Virtual Private Cloud that creates a virtual private cloud and all of the routing and so forth within that, and the security within that. We can also have the Elastic Compute Cloud, or EC2, where we can create Linux servers or Windows servers or whatever servers we want to create, and we can launch them within our VPC. And we also have Elastic Block Storage, which is storage that we can attach to our EC2 instances. So we can use this to piece together an end solution. And so don't be too concerned about whether you don't understand what VPC, EC2 and EBS is. We're going to discuss this further on in this lecture and in very much more detail throughout the course as well. The next model is the Platform as a Service, or PaaS, and that is where AWS manages the underlying infrastructure, which is usually the hardware and operating system. A good example of that is where you want to deploy a database, for example. So you could use the EC2 service and create a building block using EC2 inside of VPC and have an EBS attached to it and whatever. And then you can put your application, your database application on top of that server, and you manage that server, you manage that operating system, you manage that database. Or you could use something like the RDS platform as a service. So the relational database service, or RDS, that will take care of the basic building blocks. It'll take care of the Linux operating system. It'll take care of the EC2 instances. And you really just need to worry about the database itself. And so that's a step above from using EC2 to manually create a database solution. Another example is Elastic MapReduce, which is AWS's Hadoop platform as a service, and AWS Elasticsearch, which is AWS's Elastic.co Elasticsearch platform as a service as well. The next one is far more abstract, and that is software as a service. And that is where a completed product that is run and managed by the service provider, and mostly refers to end user applications. So there's some example of that if you are using web-based email, where you go to a browser and you access your email. That is a software as a service. You don't need to worry about what's behind that. You just use it as a service. Another very good example of a software as a service is Microsoft Office 365. Another one is Salesforce.com, where you can use these applications and use them as a service and deploy them as a service without having to worry about what is behind those, not having to worry about the architecture and the operating systems and all of that behind these services. Another concept that we need to talk about is serverless computing, and that allows us to build and run applications and services without thinking about servers at all. And that kind of sits somewhere between platform as a service and software as a service. So although it is quite abstract and high level, you still can create an application on top of that. So it's not fully a software as a service, it fits somewhere in between there. And it's also referred to as a function as a service or abstracted services. Some good examples of that are the Amazon Simple Storage Service, and we'll talk more about these services in the next few slides. AWS Lambda, which is a service where we can just give our code to AWS and it will run that code for us and bill us in 100 millisecond increments. So we don't need to worry about anything other than just supply our application code and Lambda will run that for us. Amazon DynamoDB is a serverless computing NoSQL database. We just create a table for that database and AWS looks after everything that is needed to run that database for us, and it worries about everything for that database and the support of that database. Amazon Simple Notification Service is another serverless environment where we can send messages to different devices. We can send push notifications to mobile devices, and we don't need to worry about what's behind that SNS service. There are a number of cloud computing deployment models, depending on whether we want to deploy 100% to the cloud or whether we want to take advantage of existing on-premises infrastructure as well. So the first one there is a fully cloud deployment, and that's where everything is fully deployed in the cloud and all parts of the application run in the cloud. We have a hybrid solutions where that is connecting the infrastructure and applications between cloud-based resources and our existing resources that are not located in the cloud. We also have an on-premises solution, which 100% on-premises we're not going to be discussing other than here in regards to the AWS certified exam. And that is where we have 100% of our cloud computing deployed on our own infrastructure. So that is deploying resources on premises using virtualization and resource management tools. And that is where we call a private cloud, where we use our own resources, we pool all those resources together, and we use a virtualization model to create our own cloud computing on-premises private cloud. Now, if you go to the AWS homepage at aws.amazon.com, and you should already have gone to that homepage and should have already have created an AWS account. But if you go back to that homepage, you can see, if you click on products, you'll see that the offering available from AWS is absolutely enormous. And when you're not exposed previously to AWS and you look at it, you think, wow, where do we start? So we're just going to run through the different categories there, and we can see that the categories are divided into compute, storage, database, and a whole heap of other different categories. We're just going to go through those categories now and look at some of the services that we'll be using within those categories within the course. The categories that I'm going to concentrate in this lecture are the compute, storage, database, networking and content delivery, management tools, security, identity and compliance, messaging, and the analytics category. Now, there's a lot more. So we've also got, on the right hand side there, you can see we've got application services, we've got migration, we've got developer tools, mobile services, Internet of Things, business productivity, desktop and app streaming, game development, artificial intelligence, and that list is growing all the time. But I'm just going to concentrate on those categories on the left that are most relevant for an associate level certification. Now again, one thing to consider here is that the AWS service offering is rapidly expanding, and you know, it's always a good idea to check the availability of a service in your particular region. For this course, we use the US East 1 standard region, simply because that is the main service that has the broadest range of AWS services available to it. If you're using, for example, Mumbai, that's a very new service, and so it's not going to have all of the services available for it. But if you just go to that URL there that is on the screen, and you can check the availability of a service in a region before you start working on your application. Okay, so now that we've got the theory out of the way, we've got the boring stuff out of the way, we can start to use Amazon Web Services. So the first thing we need to do is to create an AWS account. So go to aws.amazon.com, and we click on Create an AWS account. So then we just put in our email address and click on I am a new user and go through the sign up process, and we will create an account. Just looking at this page here, we've got on the right hand side there, AWS accounts include 12 months of free tier access. So that's something that you need to keep into consideration, that if you use these resources, if you keep track of your free tier access, you're not going to get a bill at the end of the month. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So for now, just go ahead and sign up for AWS, and it's not going to cost you anything. So once you've signed up for AWS and you've got your account all established, you can go back into the homepage, select My Account, and then go to AWS Management Console. Now your Management Console might look a little bit different if you've never used AWS before. There might be a welcome page there. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the user interface for the Management Console. So on the left-hand side here, we've got the console home. So just click on that. Just click on that orange cube to get back to where we are here. We have the services menu, and we can see there that we have our services will be grouped according to compute, storage, database. But if we click on the right-hand side here, we can also list those alphabetically. I prefer to have them listed alphabetically, but it's up to you what you would like to do. Another thing that I find is quite handy is that we've got a pin button here. So if we're using any of these services quite regularly, we can drag them onto the toolbar. So for example, if we're using Amazon S3,
we can drag it onto there. If we're using RDS regularly, we can put that on there as well. Also, another thing that I would like you to take note of is that here we have a menu for the region that we are in. So I'm in US East North Virginia, and please make sure that you are always in US East North Virginia also for this course. The reason being is that if you're in another region that may not fully support all of the services, and you may encounter problems. So for example, if you're from India and you'd like to use the Mumbai region, by all means use it for your own personal use. But for this course, please don't use the Mumbai region because it's a new region and it doesn't support all of the available AWS services. And it does make it more difficult for me when you've got a question, when something goes wrong. So just next to that, we have the account menu. So we've got my account and organization. The one that I want you to take good note of here is the billing dashboard. So I'm just going to click on the billing dashboard. And that's what you need to keep an eye on quite regularly, because you don't want to get a bill at the end of the month from AWS unless you can avoid it. So on this account, I've been quite good. I'm going to get billed for 1 cent. Now, the reason is because I just use this account for doing labs and nothing else. So just the same as I'm getting billed 1 cent, you could do the same with your account. Just keep it to 1 cent or below. It's quite easy to do. All you need to do is just make sure that you check the billing and cost management dashboard regularly to make sure you're not going to exceed it. So it's one thing to have a current expenditure, but what the most important thing is to have a look at what our forecasted expenditure is going to be. So we can see here we have our top free tier services by usage. So keep an eye on that, because that will tell you what your forecast to spend if you continue with the usage as you currently are. So you can see there I've been using Amazon S3 quite a bit, and I've already gone through 61.9% of my free tier limit. So because I'm halfway through the month, if I continue to do that, I'm going to exceed that, and I'm going to get a bill from Amazon Web Services for that. It won't be a particularly big bill; it might be $1 or something, but it's something that needs to take into consideration and keep a track of. So that's about all I'm going to show you for now of the AWS Management Console. Because the best way to really use this is just to really get your hands on these services and start doing stuff. So over the next few lectures, we're going to be doing a lot of hands-on. The early part of this course will be very hands-on, because I believe that you really need to have that to fully understand the more advanced theory behind a lot of this stuff. So it's going to make a lot more sense if you already know how to launch a Linux server, you know how to create a SQL database and all this sort of thing. So these are the kind of short things and short exercises that we're going to do over the next few lectures. Now, before we finish this lecture, you would have noticed that when it started, or hopefully you would have noticed, when this lecture started, there would have been a message that said that there are resources available. So what you need to do is you need to click on the Content tab and download those resources for this section. And one of those is the Introduction to AWS Lab Notes. And what that will allow you to do is to sit back and watch the videos of the labs, and then grab your lab notes and follow through and do it yourself. And that way you're not going to get lost. So coming up, again, we're going to have some pretty good AWS labs that are going to introduce us to the AWS services. And we're going to, first off, we're going to create an Amazon S3 bucket and use that to store some files. Then we're going to go into something a little bit more advanced, and we're going to deploy a WordPress server on Amazon EC2. Then we're going to be sending some emails using Amazon Simple Email Service. And then finally, we're going to deploy a SQL database server using Amazon Relational Database Service. So I'll see you in the labs.